Well, we've got a stellar crew of activists here that I'm very eager to introduce and hear from while we eat here. I hope to have a lot of Q&A at the end of the presentations of this so we can have a really active dialogue. What I'd like each activist to do is explain a little bit about their focus of activism and not just the projects they're pursuing, but the strategies and what they see as the long-term challenges and goals that they ought to undertake, and how their specific organizations are grappling with that. We have Jamie told me 4 minutes apiece, but I think we can figure 5 and have the rest for Q&A. And so I'm going to try to hold everybody to a kind of tough standard on the 5 minutes so we can all get through. So without further ado, we'll just go down the line. Are you getting to the top of the line?
No. I just found a seat.
Okay, that's fine. Without further ado, we will just go down the line and have each activist explain their activity. We'll have Q&A at the end. One, Marc? Okay.
I first of all wanted to thank Jamie for bringing us all together today, although I think the act of segregating the activists in one group in this fashion caused me at least a little bit of concern. I wasn't sure if we were supposed to get a chorus of Kumbaya going or something. Well, we've got a the people united will never be defeated thing coming up. Sit down with Eben and work on some of the lyrics for that. He probably already wrote them, actually. I think my role here is a little bit unique because EPIC, of course, is not really an intellectual property organization, and so I think I'm here to talk a little bit about the experience from the privacy world, where I think we have had some success over the past decade to try to politicize the public debate surrounding information privacy. And one of the things that Jamie wrote in his article, which was very much in my mind a number of years ago, is how do you move an emerging political issue into a traditional political environment? And we commonly think about the environment, for example, the environmental movement. And I thought, well, how do you environmentalize an issue so that people think of themselves as being active participants in a policy debate, and you force policy choices, and you make everybody, in a sense, an activist around this issue of concern? Now, what's interesting, of course, about the privacy world is that we've had for many years Orwell's legacy hanging over us, which was this very bleak techno-determinist future, when there were basically 2 lessons. We were all going to lose, and there was no point in trying. And every news story basically conveyed this message. Orwell was right. He was just off by a few years. Our Orwellian future had arrived. It was very fatalist in the 1980s when people spoke about privacy. It may well still, in many significant respects, be fatalist today. But one of the things that the privacy advocates in the U.S. and around the world set out to do in the late 1980s was basically tear up that script and create a new one and say the future, what happens next, is not going to be determined by technology, and it's not going to be determined by large, powerful organizations. It's going to be determined by what you or I choose to do or choose not to do. And as a starting premise, I think for any advocacy movement, you have to begin with the belief that the future is in our hands. The second thing you have to do is call someone, a media organization, and get them to write a story. Now, I say that only half jokingly. I mean, the privacy world gets a lot of news coverage these days, which I think is great. But it's also a very purposeful type of engagement. We have no interest in seeing a news story that says, this Orwellian development has arrived. Orwell was just off by a few years. We want the media to help promote a public debate that forces choice. We want the media to lay out in a thoughtful, serious fashion the issues that are facing decision makers in Washington, that are facing local communities across the country, that allow people to participate in a discussion about, for example, what is the appropriate use of a national identification card, or face recognition in airports, or biometric identifiers, or for that matter, the decision yesterday of the Department of Justice to monitor confidential lawyer-client communications. The media is not just about message, it's about promoting public debate and dialogue that involves everyone. Now, this is a second key insight, I think, about the nature of information politics. It cannot be a discussion among elites. When I came to the privacy issue in the 1980s, I was amazed how well, I guess you would say in academic circles, the hard issues had been worked out. I mean, there was a tremendous amount of stuff that happened as a result of the automation of information systems in the late 60s and early 70s, and regulatory frameworks in the US and Europe, and a lot of very serious writing. There has not been a whole lot of new stuff in the world of privacy thinking, at least as to automated information systems over the last 20 years. What was lacking was a public debate, a discourse, an infrastructure of organization, a way to mobilize people so that, for example, when Intel decides to put a unique identifier in a computer chip, when a company called DoubleClick wants to profile everybody who uses the internet, when today Microsoft wants to be a gatekeeper for internet access by means of passport registration, there has to be organization and infrastructure and a public that cares and is concerned about these developments. Well, I know I don't have much time, and I'm going to pull this together, but the last point I just wanted to make, also in trying to environmentalize a movement, if you look around the world today, we have huge environmental challenges. Streams, air, toxic disposal. The big challenges of the day are not solved. We learn to manage them. And that's where I think we are with privacy today. We are going to have huge privacy challenges in the years ahead. We are not going to win this and move on to another issue. It's going to be with us for our lifetimes. And my suspicion about the effort to establish and maintain an information commons, a public domain, is that it will, in similar fashion, be an ongoing battle, which we will continue to fight. But fight it, I think you must. I think the stakes are too high. I think the consequences of losing are too severe. And the one thing that we've learned in the privacy world, the technology doesn't decide, the large corporations don't decide, we decide.
Before we start, do I have anything in my teeth? Hi, did you introduce? Did you just get that? Well, now that I have 3.5 minutes left, my name is Gigi Sohn, and I am the president of a new organization, a new advocacy, research, educational organization, the first of its kind, I think, in the United States, at least. I don't like to be, too imperialistic. That's going to represent citizens' rights on public domain and information commons issues. And we are really brand new. We really just got incorporated about a month and a half ago, and I'm extremely excited. I'm very, very psyched. It's great to see all the energy in this room. I really have to agree. My ultimate goal really is to do for the information commons, to do for public domain advocacy what Marc Rotenberg has done for privacy advocacy, and he really is, in a lot of ways, sort of the model for how to do public advocacy right and change the debate around a certain issue, change public perception. And I think we've heard a lot, and I think really Larry said it quite well about, the conflict, the North-South conflict in people's minds. And I think the main goal and the main duty of public knowledge is to, I don't want to say wage a war, I think that's not the best choice of words in this day and age, but basically engage in a PR campaign, a major PR campaign to change people's perception of intellectual property and what and what basically enclosure of information does to creativity, to innovation. The whole notion that's been talked about this weekend about standing on shoulders, how people's inventions, how people's creativity does not just come out of thin air, okay? People do not get ideas. They just wake up one day and say, hey, I've got this great idea for a song. It came from somewhere else. I have this great idea for a piece of art. It came from somewhere else. People need to be made to see how the creative process works, how the inventing process works, to start to change their minds. And what's so great about this issue, which really wasn't in the issue that I worked in for 12 years, and that is media and telecommunications, is that we do have creative people who can help us with the tools. You know, a Marc Hostler, a Damien Loeb, who wasn't able to come this weekend, who could really give us some of the tools to start to change public opinion on this. Two other roles that I think are important that public knowledge are going to take on. And one is, I call it the 4 C's: coordinator, collaborator, commissioner of research, and constituency builder. Julie Cohen last week at a meeting we had at Wye River for the Library Association kept talking about WWCD, or what would conservatives do? And Julie's really kind of witty when you get to know her a little bit. Well, what would conservatives do if they were in the position we were in, is that the main actors, the main people doing activism and research and public relations in this area would get together and start a campaign. Okay, they would have a research. They would put together, not working separately, a research agenda, a legal policy agenda, a constituency building agenda, elites education agenda, the press, policymakers, judges, a PR agenda, and an agenda for alternative infrastructures like the e-commons or Creative Commons. We need to do that, and public knowledge seeks to be the place to start that conversation. If we are, as my experience is not disparaging anybody, and I was part of this community, so in a way I'm disparaging myself, I think one of the failings of the public interest media / telecommunications movement, such as it is that there were a lot of people sort of working separately, and it really is only in recent years, where it may be too late, that people have come together and start to work with the academic community and start to work together. And I think we need to start that from the very, very, very beginning. And the third area, which we're going to be very active in, is as a policy advocate. Now, I realize that there are very, very, very good people who have been working in this area for a very long time. The library community, the research community, Jonathan Tasini. I mean, there's people around this table, people in this room, and we don't seek to usurp that role. We seek really to augment it. And I think it's important not only to do that at the domestic level, but also at the international level. It's very, very overwhelming. I had lunch with Manon and her colleague and also husband, Jamie Love, and we talked about what's going on with intellectual property in the international arena, and it is daunting. But there really is a need to set a public interest agenda for international IP. Manon could talk about that much better than I can. But again, the general purpose of this organization, and I really welcome, we have a very broad outline of the 5 areas we want to work in. I won't go through them now. If people are interested, give me your card. I'll email it to you. Our website will be up in 2 weeks. Keep your fingers crossed. But we still are looking for specific projects. We have some ideas of specific projects we want to start off with, and we'll probably start being really operational about January or February. But if you have ideas for where this organization can make a difference in the different policy areas, I'd really like to know. David is working with me. We're funded by an extremely generous grant from the Center for the Public Domain, and Lori Racine, who's not here right now, is one of our chief strategists. But we're looking for ideas. I don't profess to know it all. We don't profess to know it all. We need you to help us. So with that, I will sit down.
And now? Being a French speaker, much more than an English speaker, I think I should be given more time. Plus, the project I work on is a very long project. It's about the Hague Convention on Jurisdiction and Foreign Judgment. My name is Manon. I work for quite a few bosses, Ralph Nader, John Richard, Rob Weissman, and I keep forgetting, Jamie Love. But today I'll be concentrating on just one aspect of my work. I know that this room is full of people who know much more than I do about The Hague and about international private law, but I'll give you the activist take on it. Explaining the Hague Conference in 5 minutes or less is already pretty bizarre, but since you know what it means, it's an instrument that sets jurisdiction rules in commercial litigation involving cross-border disputes. Well, basically what it does is it's going to make it easier to enforce foreign judgments. And I have to just note that the U.S. Pushed for this project in 1992 based on the idea that we were here enforcing foreign judgments, but they were not. In some areas, it makes forum shopping very easy, and very importantly, I think, because it's quite different from other international instruments, it does not require harmonization of substantive law. There's winners and losers, and you can imagine that it's a pretty good treaty for plaintiffs. It's pretty bad for defendants because they're going to have to go all over the world. It undermines ISP common carrier status, and in a way, it's a strange kind of situation for activists because I've been aligned with the ISPs on this fight. AT&T, Verizon, we're all together. It goes back to something Larry was saying this morning. I mean, there's contradictions on the other side too. Maybe there are on our side too, and maybe we can find some ways to do the same thing. Who are the 50 members of the Hague Conference? Few members, only 55. I say very few because compared to the New York Convention, it's not that bad. It has more than 100 countries. Most European countries, of course, the US, Canada, Japan, Turkey, Jordan, South Africa just joined recently. What's interesting, I think, is that these countries have definitely different IP laws and very different values. I keep hearing about the public domain and free speech here, but these are very American values. And maybe we have to think in terms of what's going on in these countries and how they define the public domain if we sign the treaty. I gave the source. You can run, but you can't hide. That's the way Jonathan Zittrain defined the treaty. And I think it's important to understand that for all of us, because we've been talking about the internet, about publishing on the internet, and how fair use and U.S. law could protect us. But I think that when it goes way beyond the U.S. laws, we're in trouble. Unlike some of my colleagues, I'm not going to say, watch out for those Chinese. I would say, watch out for the UK, because they can be pretty rough. Watch out for those French people, too, as you know, on speech. So what are the problems? There's so many problems. It's a little bit like for the Greens. You can take your pick. But I try to focus on a few. As you know, many countries have restrictive laws on speech. And what is allowed here is not allowed in other countries for good or bad reason. People in those countries pay the price and decide. As Jamie Bowles said yesterday, public domain is what people know they can use. Well, we don't really know what we can use when we post something on the internet that could be considered an infringement of government copyright in the UK or in China. There's many countries that have restrictive laws on IP, and the first example, of course, is e-commerce and software patents, and that's where the U.S. is really the bad guys for the world. And let's not even mention business method patents and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and things like that. But other countries have their share of ridiculous patents, too. We have a page that's called the Dumbass Patents. And you can share. There's sui generis IP rights. I mean, the database protection in Europe makes everybody in this room totally afraid. But, you know, they can very easily sue a university or a library from France and force a judgment once the treaty is signed. Right now, it's not happening because there's no enforcement mechanism, really. What's in it? Why would they sue, you know? To have no money is not going to be enough. There's also a problem, of course, on fair use, which doesn't even exist in some countries. Trademark, patents, hypertext linking could be a big problem. Use of copyright or trade secret laws. In the UK, you have this crown copyright, you know, that makes U.S. activists pretty nervous. Lots of other rights, but you know them better than I do. So for us, because we're in the business of providing information, it's a very, very dangerous treaty. It's certainly going to shrink the public domain. One possibility that's very clear to everyone is that publishers are going to choose the best form, of course, and that's not going to be here. Could be France. Anyone who distributes software or information about the internet will be liable. And last week in Brussels, there was a hearing on the Hague Convention, and some software programmer came to explain that it can't be happening. I mean, we can't do that. It's already hard for a German programmer to defend himself in Brussels, but if he has to defend himself in Seattle, it could be even harder. Basically, all sui generis IP regime are going to be enforceable, and the treaty is going to shift the cost of IP enforcement to foreign consumers. So it's going to make our work much more difficult in terms of moving our agenda that we're trying to define. So we need a new paradigm for treaties. I think that the old way of looking at treaties, whether it's NAFTA, TRIPS, WIPO, and the Hague Convention right now, has been to always look at the ceiling and at the floor. And of course, the ceiling is for the public rights, and any country can have less rights. And then a minimum for the IP owners. And it's almost like everybody accept that deal and say, well, that's the way it is. This is what WIPO is doing. Well, we really think that we have to reverse that paradigm. And we have to start, and I think this kind of dialogue is a start. We have to start discussing it in a different way, with the ceiling for the property owners and the floor for us, the minimum. Well, if you have any question about the negotiation and where we're going with it, you can talk to me after this panel.
Hi, I'm Jenny Toomey, and I'm the executive director of the Coalition for the Future of Music. I'm also a rocker, but today I have my activist hat on, as you can tell. Sometimes it feels like you're wearing a cowboy hat when you speak about activism, but that's probably not the case in this room today. And the reason I'm probably here is to sort of articulate a growing understanding within the independent creator community that our voice is not being represented. by the ones that are brought out to represent the voices of industry, whether that's the people who are very excited about locking things down or necessarily people who want everything to be completely open. I think what's I can tell you a little bit about Future of Music. I ran an independent record label for 8 years. And one of the things that we were known for was sharing basic information because creators tend to be poor. And they don't have a lot of extra time to sort of reinvent the wheel. So we figured out a basic way to put out records, and we put a guide to putting out records out, and we made it available for anybody who would send us stamps to send it to them. And it created this sort of little revolution of people putting out 7 inches. And we closed the label down, and I began writing about music and technology about 2 years later, and I saw this thing called the MP3. And I thought, oh my goodness. Suddenly, the ceiling that we had run up against with our independent label can disappear. And I thought, well, all of these independent labels, who I love so much, need to know about this stuff. So we began calling them up and saying, well, hey, Corey, you run Touch and Go Records. It's one of the most successful independent labels. What do you think about this stuff? Yeah, we don't know anything about it. Well, what about you, Ian? You know, you sell 100,000 Fugazi records, pushing water uphill outside the major distribution chains. What do you think about the internet? I don't know. So we thought, all right, let's do it again. Let's do the guide to putting out music on the web. And we began studying it in that strange period where there was about 50 people who were offering digital downloads on the web. And in that period, about 6 months, that group consolidated to about 6, and then very quickly into 3. The most popular of which was requiring artists to sign exclusive contracts. So we began, it was funny, we originally thought, well, we'll write about which codecs sound the best and which people are the nicest to deal with. And then eventually we realized what we really needed to write about was the fact that maybe signing an exclusive contract with a company that had only existed for 6 months and which had absolutely no track record for being able to make anyone pay for what they were trying to make people pay for, maybe that was a bad idea. And we became activists around that issue, and that's what Future of Music's done. And it's been very interesting thinking about the way that people phrase the term the work that they do, because I think it really is a big picture, little picture thing. A lot of what we do are little picture things. Someone says record label contracts are terrible, and we say, well, just how terrible are they? And we managed to get a bunch of academic lawyers and people who've been in that community to write a long paper about just how bad they are, which is wonderful because when we have people like Carrie Sherman coming here and saying it's a fair negotiation, it felt like throwing rocks at a poor little rat in a teacup or something like that. That said, we don't have to say anything because, and that's one of the reasons we love the internet, right? Because, first of all, we met all these lawyers who gave us all the information we needed on the internet, and they all didn't take them much time. This goes back to what Yokai was saying. It didn't take them much time to clip out one controlled composition clause from one of their contracts and send it to us with an explanation in English about how it actually hurts artists. And what's wonderful is that, I think the internet does a lot of this work for us. We don't really need to yell at Carrie Sherman so much because we can just let him hang himself in some ways. Everything he says is documented. We got yelled at because a statistic that I use in one of my speeches says that 99.6% of the musicians that go through the major label system end up in debt to their labels, which most people would say is a failing system. They said, no, that statistic is wrong. That is an outrageous statistic. Well, we looked on the web, and what Carrie said to Congress 2 weeks previous to that was that 90% of their artists fail, and I'm not sure that's a much better statistic. We amended our speech, clearly. We don't want to be lying to people. But, you can just let them hang themselves. Let's see. Well, I guess one of the final points that I wanted to say is that when I originally went to the conferences trying to learn about this stuff, one thing that really worried me was a lot of this was about music and technology, and there were no musicians there, except for a couple musicians who were actually shilling for whatever technology they owned, usually. And we began writing about these issues specifically because we didn't feel people were representing our issues. But what was really nice is we were able to see that, this issue isn't just an issue that affects musicians, it affects other people. Because these are structural problems. And I think that's one of the funnest things about being able to come to these kinds of conferences, because you can see strategies about how scientists are dealing with these issues, or maybe certain structures that scientists have that protect them that artists don't have, that maybe can be applied to artists. So I think one of the strengths of the Future of Music Coalition's approach to this is the fact that our board is a programmer, a lawyer, a lobbyist, an activist, a rocker, and an economist. And we have the fights that are playing out in the media among ourselves first. So we actually understand the value of information, which is something that I always think the internet is great for. That, you know, if you can actually get smart people to argue in real time, you can actually see the value of logical arguments, as opposed to just the sort of power that money pushes certain arguments to the top. So, I think I've talked about all of this stuff, the big ideas and the little ideas. The big ideas are that these are the foundational ideas, the ideas about the fact that artistic labor is valuable, the fact that people should have access to information, the fact that money shouldn't dictate what you're allowed to have access to. And the little ideas are just how bad those contracts are, and let's get them documented. And I think that goes to what, and maybe I'll finish on this, what Jamie said in his opening speech, which is that you begin with what is the public domain, and then you need to move from there into what can it be. And I think that's hopefully what we'll all take away from this, which is going out into the world and figuring out what kind of models we really want and working to build them.
Hi, my name is Robin Gross, and I'm an intellectual property attorney with the Electronic Frontier Foundation. For those of you who aren't familiar with the EFF, we're a nonprofit civil liberties organization. We work to protect civil liberties in cyberspace, things like free speech, fair use rights, privacy rights, that sort of thing. Founded in 1990, so we're 11 years old, which is actually pretty ancient for internet time. We have three basic roles that we do. We educate, and we advocate, and when all else fails, we litigate. In 1999, out of concern for overzealous attempts to control intellectual property and what that is doing to the exchange of creative expression, we founded CAFE, the Campaign for Audiovisual Free Expression. As part of that, we have developed a general public license for music called the Open Audio License, borrowing from ideas from the Free Software Foundation and the open source software movement, where musicians can release their works under this license and essentially grant the public permission to copy and to share, to make derivative works, publicly perform these songs, all with permission from the copyright holders. The only catch is you have to give attribution. You have to give credit back to the author, usually in the way of a web address or a URL or some kind of email address. So somewhere down the line, people are able to establish some kind of revenue-generating relationship with the musicians and artists that they come to respect. We want to begin the discussion, have people begin to ask, instead of asking the question, how can I keep people from listening to my music without paying for it, have them begin to ask the question, well, how can I make money from the distribution of my music, which is really what musicians should be looking for, I think. We've also been involved in some court cases, some litigation. This summer, a Russian programmer was arrested for writing a software program. His name is Dmitry Sklarov, that essentially cracks Adobe's ebook format. And we've been involved in helping to organize protests all over the globe, and with discussion lists and other kinds of legal resources and expert resources to help and aid in the defense of this software programmer. We've also been involved more directly in a few other pieces of litigation recently. Some of you may have heard of DCSS. If you haven't, you can just go type it into Google and you'll find it, thousands of copies of it all over the web. It's a software program written by a Norwegian teenager and a few other teenagers in Europe that was part of a project to try to create an open source DVD player for the Linux operating system. And it's caused quite a stir a few years ago. The movie studios filed a slew of lawsuits against individuals who had published DCSS on their websites, and EFF came to the defense of these web publishers. There was a California trade secrets misappropriation case where the claim was that the people who had published this software on their websites were misappropriating trade secrets. And I'm happy to report that a unanimous California appellate court about 10 days ago overturned an injunction in that case on First Amendment grounds, arguing that these folks have First Amendment rights to publish this information that was readily available in the public domain. The studios had been arguing that anyone who came across this information and tried to republish it should be precluded on trade secrets grounds. And the court unanimously overturned the injunction and said that these folks have First Amendment rights to publish this information. We're also hoping any day now to get an injunction overturned from the Second Circuit Court of Appeals in a similar case involving the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, where the studios sued a magazine, 2600 magazine, they were reporting on this controversy, and they included the software as part of their coverage. And they were also sued, and a judge in New York last summer issued an injunction against the web publisher, said he's not allowed to post this software or even link to other sites that post this software, claiming that the software is a circumvention device in violation of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, because the software can be used to tell someone how they can bypass the technological restrictions in DVDs. Now, it's important to realize that these DVDs are copyrighted, which means that there's the copyright bargain is involved here. And whereas these studios are all wanting all of the privileges of copyright protection here, but they're not wanting any of the responsibilities. They keep these movies locked up such that they don't fall into the public domain at some point, such that people aren't able to make fair use of these movies. And so this software is necessary in order for these people to be able to exercise their rights under the copyright bargain as well. And so we're hopeful any day now to get a decision from the Second Circuit Court of Appeals overturning that injunction as well against the web publisher in New York. We've also been involved in another lawsuit against the recording industry on behalf of a Princeton professor, Ed Felton, who was studying the digital rights management system from the SDMI, Secure Digital Music Initiative process. And this professor and his research team participated in the SDMI Hack Challenge, and when he studied the technology, what he discovered was that it was remarkably weak and that it would be cracked upon its immediate introduction into the marketplace. And when he went to write a paper on this, he and his research team, and presented at a conference, the recording industry sent the professors, the research team, the universities they work for, and the conference organizers all threat letters saying they would be sued under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act if they went ahead and presented their research at this technical conference. So EFF filed a lawsuit in federal court this summer asking the court to declare that these researchers have a First Amendment right to publish their research. Once that happened, the recording industry sort of backed down and said, oh, we didn't mean it. He can go ahead and publish at this one conference. And so the paper was able to be presented at a later conference. However, the case goes on because there are other papers in the works that the recording industry is not willing to say that they will not sue for. And so we're pressing forward with that case as well. Very recently, we just took up the defense of Music City, which was just sued also by the recording industry. Music City creates this software called Morpheus, which is a peer-to-peer file sharing program. And their claim is that because this software allows people to make copies of works and distribute them, that they should be guilty for contributory and vicarious copyright infringement. However, the Supreme Court back in the 1980s already handled this issue in the famous Betamax case and said you can't outlaw technology if it is capable of substantial non-infringing uses. And of course, this file sharing software is very capable of substantial non-infringing uses. Look, what is the public domain, for example? But things that people are allowed to share and encouraged to share, as well as works that people give permission to share on these programs. So this is just sort of a very brief summary of the different kinds of cases that we've been working on and the different issues that we've been working on. And if you'd like more information, I invite you to go to the website at www.eff.org and join. Thank you.
I'm Jeff Chester. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Digital Democracy. It's also a relatively new organization. We created it in May of this year. And our mission is really to empower the public, the individual, the citizen, in their community and across the country, to take hold of what their digital destiny should be with the emergence of the broadband internet, to become informed, to understand what the options are, that indeed there are options, alternatives to the dangers which I believe threaten diversity of information, democratic use in the new media environment. We want people to understand about the domestic residential architecture of control, which is emerging, particularly in the cable industry, but also with wireless, that in essence privatizes the communications infrastructure. We've been tracking this for a number of years, evolving out of the work in a way that that I did with Gigi and others on mass media. And although it was dim, we had some successes. But one of the things we were tracking several years ago, it was very clear what cable and the other folks wanted to do, what their vision of the internet was. And I want to acknowledge the presence of one of the leading advocates in this country on telecommunications and media issues, who's been a leader all across the board, really should be down in this panel, but he registered late, Marc Cooper, Dr. Marc Cooper of the Consumer Federation of America, who's back there and has been a leader here. But it was very clear to those activists who had been fighting old media, and we were at a tremendous disadvantage because we did not really have a constituency anymore. There was a constituency in the 1960s as part of the civil rights and women's rights movements, but that constituency more or less had evaporated. We don't have to go into it now. But we were tracking what cable was saying. And their vision for the internet was, we want to have the same kind of control that we have with multi-channel television in this new media environment. And indeed, they already got companies like Cisco and others to create those plans. So it was very clear, and about 2 years ago, in sort of looking at their plans and seeing at the time that AOL was creating a whole new coalition of nonprofit groups to fight for so-called open access, I then realized that AOL would have to eventually switch rather than fight. It would have to buy, and there would be no advocacy infrastructure left. So luckily, we were able to bring various groups together, really only 4 groups: Consumer Federation of America, the Media Access Project, Consumers Union, and then my organization, the Center for Media Education, reach out to people like Larry Lessig. And a month prior to the merger, 2 years ago, in Washington and in New York, at the New York Times editorial board, began articulating what the dangers were. And we were there for that merger. And so one of the things that my organization does is track and analyze and publicize the business plans, the architectural plans of what I domestic control over the internet. This is all going to be made worse by the upcoming tremendous consolidation of control that the FCC has proposed, that in essence would end all the remaining ownership rules, so that in your community, one company could own the newspaper, several TVs, several radio stations, the cable system, without any kind of open access, non-discrimination policy. This is something we have to stop. And to that end, one of the ways we are doing it at the Center for Digital Democracy is to go and expose the plans of the media industry in how they are creating this architecture, not just for today, but more importantly, for the near term and tomorrow. So in a major city as we speak, we have hired, along with my partner, the ACLU, network architects. I like to use the can opener metaphor, taking apart their plans. We're going to show the blocks. We're going to show how their plans hurt commerce and community. We're going to show how you can have better use of bandwidth to create a local public domain. We're going to bring together leaders to articulate a set of public interest principles for network deployment and create, when we release this report, we hope, a front page story in the local paper, town meetings. And this is really our pilot project to create a tool, an organizing tool that people can take all across the country and apply it to their own communities and take back these decisions and to create the kind of public pressure necessary to frankly fight the tremendous level of corruption that controls communications politics, indeed all politics in this country today, particularly in Washington. So we have to go back to the grassroots, I think, to find the problem that can help us address some of the national problems. Just quickly, am I being gonged? I just want to respond one thing to Eben. Because several people have articulated, Yohai, others, and it's perhaps I don't understand them. This idea that we can perhaps, at least in the short term, create this wireless readout, this non-licensed part of broadband that will allow us to communicate. I urge you not to do that. I urge you to fight at the same time to open up what I think will be the major way people will reach people in this country. The majority way will be through those cable wires. The majority way that people will campaign and send commercials in the one-to-one system, which is being created, is through these major networks. And we cannot afford to have just a small part of the elites off somewhere while the people, for the most part, get their information through what will be a combination of television and the internet. That will dominate. And we have to be part of that configuration. Thank you. No, you have to have both, but I'm concerned that some of the energy will be used for wireless and not for opening up the main system. It has to happen both at the same time. Your teeth are clean. Go ahead, Jonathan.
I feel like I'm the dessert, or at least we're getting close to the dessert here. I'm Jonathan Tasini with the National Writers Union, which is also importantly known as United Auto Workers Local 1981. And I will say why that is important in a moment. That wasn't actually a joke. What we do is we educate writers. We try to mobilize them to take on media companies to get better working conditions. Once in a while we file a lawsuit here and there. And the other thing I think we try to do is do a lot of psychotherapy for writers because they need a lot of that. And we try to make sure that they're able to get out of bed every morning and out of their pajamas and into the streets. The reason that the UAW is important in this context and why I'm standing here and why we've been affiliated with the Digital Future Coalition, for example. We're the only authors group actually that has, creators group as far as I know, that supported the Digital Future Coalition as as a member of the DFC and is involved in the work with public knowledge and so on, is that we are a union. And what we're talking about is something that's beyond just my own penny and my dime and my quarter, my dollar and my living. It's about something bigger, which is what's society and what is going to be our future. And that's something that we cherish in not only in the National Writers Union, but in the UAW generally. And one of our functions has been to try to take this message out to organized labor. The speech about organized labor and its pluses and minuses I can give some other time in some other forum, but there are millions of people who still belong to unions. And we must have organized labor involved in this discussion. Gigi and I have talked about that, and with David about trying to get organized labor involved in the public knowledge work, period. The thing I want to talk about, two other points. One is picking up, Larry mentioned the North and South divide. I actually lived in, where's Larry? I lived in Los Angeles, the other part, so I know California. But I want to talk about this other divide that came up a little bit here yesterday. Marc yesterday talked about capitalism and about the rapacious market and globalization, how people who are against globalization are being equated, I think, to terrorists. And I noticed in the room there was only half applause. There was a little bit of nervousness. There was a little bit of shifting in the chairs. People weren't really comfortable with that. And I think we have to recognize that that, in fact, in my opinion, is one of the things we have to grapple with, and that is that the struggle between our heart and the ideas that have been planted in our brains through the educational system that we all went through, that somehow the free market and the market is going to solve everything. Now, I personally don't believe in the free market. I don't think it exists. Robert Kuttner and others have written very persuasively by that. You can just see in today's world the great free market in the airline industry, right? All the airline industry wanted nothing to do with the government regulation until they had to run to the government and get a bailout. They were very happy to get government support. The free market, let me step back. I think we have to be careful about the language we use. I think Larry was right about that. But I don't think we can ignore that the free market has been essentially terrorizing particularly creators. No creator that I know of will own their individual work within the next 5 or so years. It will all be owned by corporations. And one of the things that I want to leave us with is going back to the environmentalism idea. Yes, I actually, believe it or not, worked for Greenpeace many, many moons ago. And Greenpeace was about as chaotic and crazy an organization as the National Writers Union. And one of the things that I think we have to find is where is the balancing act between being a Greenpeace, obviously, and being Earth First. I probably find myself somewhere in the middle, depending on what side of the bed I get up on in any given day. In my view, the thing that a tactic that we should use is something known as a corporate campaign. I think we have to pick the worst actor in this area, and we have to kick the shit out of this company from coast to coast. And one small element of that is, why do we allow these corporate CEOs to sit on boards of museums and libraries and universities? I am furious when I see Arthur Sulzberger, who has been ripping off my members' works, sitting on the board of the Museum of Modern Art. That is an outrage. And I think we have to mobilize our ground troops, the librarians, the people in every community, and demand from these people that they either resign from those boards of universities, libraries, and museums, or sign a commitment that they're going to support the kind of things we're talking about here. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you very much indeed to Jamie Boyle for inviting me to address you today. I'm Caspar Bowden, and I'm director of the Foundation for Information Policy Research. We're a not-for-profit, independent think tank based in London, and we were established 3 years ago. We have an advisory council of experts on human rights, freedom of information, privacy, intellectual property, and e-commerce, as well as specialists on cryptography and computer security. We're politically neutral, but we take a much more direct and activist approach to engaging and briefing Parliament and specialist and general media than is usual for a think tank. We so far worked mainly in the areas of privacy and surveillance. Some of you may have heard of the controversy last year on a new internet wiretapping and encryption law in Britain called the RIP Act, or the RIP Act. And from a starting point of zero media interest, by the close of the debate, more than 1,000 articles had appeared online and in print. And there were a total of 17 newspaper editorials spread over 9 national newspapers, all of which called for the bill to be withdrawn. To no avail. However, we did achieve about a dozen significant amendments, ameliorating some of the worst parts. And the work on implementing that still continues at a glacial pace. We also work in the area of medical privacy, electronic delivery of government services, including internet voting, and in general issues where the sheer technical complexity of the subject is creating a barrier to public understanding. Policy affecting the public domain and intellectual property in Europe is primarily decided at European level. The European Union Copyright Directive of 1999 contains provisions in many respects mirroring the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. And a patchwork of groups based in different European countries, sometimes active in several, has been campaigning quietly to highlight its dangers. In saying this, I'm acutely conscious of the chestnut about the British newspaper headline saying fog in channel, continent isolated. But I mean, it's particularly worth mentioning the work of groups such as EuroLinux, EuroRights, and the Campaign for Digital Rights, and the Association for Progressive Communications. There's no doubt that DMCA and EUCD has led to an unprecedented upsurge in geek activism, and following the arrest of Dmitry Sklyarov, there have been demonstrations outside the US Embassy in London and several other cities in the UK, coverage by national television, and the demonstrations consisting of computer programmers waving placards and singing protest songs about DMCA to the deathless tunes of Village People's greatest hit. Alan Cox, who has in fact just joined our advisory council, has made it very clear that he views the DMCA as a direct and real threat to his work on the Linux kernel. We are expecting consultation and publication of draft legislation implementing EUCD into British law sometime over the next month, and that will typically be followed by a 2-month period for public consultation. Now, in the past, we have organized a series of guerrilla conferences, sometimes organized at less than 2 weeks' notice, and we're planning to hold the first free public conference on the public interest issues raised by EUCD probably in the middle of January. And I'm afraid I can't give you better details because government departments will not usually commit to specific dates for the launch of public consultations. But part of my job here is to talent spot and provisionally enlist potential speakers and those with an interest in the comparative law and the public domain in Europe and the US. Despite the efforts, in particular of Marc Rotenberg at EPIC and also CDT and EFF and others to assist and encourage its development, European civil society in the sector of internet policy is not highly developed. Civil society participation is not in general welcomed by the UK government, and the civil service prefers overwhelmingly to conduct informal discussions with different sectors of industry and barely recognizes the existence of specialist NGOs working in cyber rights. Insofar as NGOs are informally consulted, issues tend to be couched in terms of consumer protection and a strictly legalistic conception of human rights. Engaging the European Commission in discussions with civil society is, if anything, even more difficult. Although European officials often have a broader and more technical appreciation of the issues than national bureaucracies, they are largely captive to the partition of responsibilities allocated to their directorates, and thus frequently there is structural reluctance to promote consultation with a broad variety of stakeholders. Instead, the Commission quietly picks and chooses who they wish to speak to and in which fora. Lobbying the European Parliament and Commission is an expensive business. One needs a permanent office in Brussels and ideally Strasbourg. One needs the capability of producing briefing material and responding to national media in a number of languages, and overcome the general apathy to complex EU legislative processes. When pitted against the vast army of commercial lobbyists permanently camped in the halls of the European Parliament, it isn't surprising that the public interest in the public domain is often neglected, as, for example, has already been mentioned in connection with the Database Directive. There are also directives about to be passed or have been passed on e-commerce, electronic money, communications privacy, none of which are really receiving systematic attention by specialist public interest NGOs at European level. The democratic deficit is massive. The only solution to this problem would seem to be the creation of an umbrella organization which draws together the expertise and commitment of several established national NGOs. But although tentative discussions continue between different groups, so far nobody has been able to muster the scale of resources which would give this project the necessary financial stability and political credibility with the groups concerned, most of whom are naturally preoccupied with policy at national level. I believe the way forward for activism on internet policy issues in Europe is through James Boyle's concept of digital environmentalism. Public understanding of the importance of information policy is slowly increasing, too slowly, but there is huge potential and need to establish organizations based both on grassroots membership and institutes for policy research. We'll soon have to think about a different type of convergence, not the convergence between broadcast and broadband media, but the convergence in the desire and capabilities of the state and the private sector to surveil their citizens and consumers. Over the next few months, national governments and the European Parliament will decide whether to implement policies of mandatory traffic data retention. This will show where you go, the geographic coordinates of your mobile phone, soon to an accuracy of a few meters, what you read online, ISP logs of transparent web caches, and who you talk to, the from and to email addresses. President Bush has written to the President of the Commission requesting adoption of such a policy. Last week, the UK government admitted that ISPs may be obliged to stockpile logs on the online behavior of all subscribers which will be used not only for counter-terrorist investigations, but also for matters connected with health and safety, taxation, peaceful civil protest, and minor crimes, including, of course, civil or criminally enforced copyright infringement. Thank you very much.
We'd like to, Jamie, how much longer do we have?
I think we could go until 5:02.
Oh, good. So we have a good 15 minutes. Well, let's have a robust dialogue here. Yes, for whichever.
A few weeks ago, I got a call from our computer science department at the University of Minnesota. A bunch of people there together, some people from the community, were upset about the Skylarov arrest. They said, we're going to hold a teach-in and talk about the DMCA for 3 hours. So I did. And at the end of the talk, they said, great, now we know about the DMCA. We want to do something. What do we do? Right? And I've had this sort of experience 2 or 3 times. People who want to be put to work, they want to be part of Yokai's peer-to-peer, I guess, activism. And they don't just want to write a letter to their congressperson or make a little donation to Epic or EFF. Where do I send these people?
That's an excellent question. Let me respond personally. I think that is one of the signal deficiencies we have politically and civically in this area, and I think these are the building blocks for that. But maybe Gigi or Robin would.
I'll take that. One thing that we like to recommend folks do on these issues, how they can get involved, is to educate their non-tech savvy friends. If you understand these issues, you understand what's wrong with the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, you really have to take it upon yourself to educate at least 3 people who don't use the internet, who have never heard of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, and explain to them why this matters to them. And I think that's really one of the most important things you can do.
Gigi has a quick thing to say.
Send them to me. I want to get. That's fine. 30 will become 60, will become 90, and it will just, I want to start to. I know this may make Marc cringe, but I want to build a nice big database of people who want to move on these issues. In fact, I was asking the libraries last week to give me their database. But, anyway,
Marc, you have a quick.
I think they should write a letter to the editor. They should sit down that evening, write 3 paragraphs, what their concern is and what they think should happen. Very important, when you see a problem, propose a solution, stick it in an envelope, and send it to the local newspaper. It can have an enormous impact. It's very therapeutic. And, suddenly you get a little public discussion going in the community.
Look, yes.
I'm the bearer of somebody else's message here. Barbara Simon from the Association for Computing Machinery asked me to tell everyone that she is planning on starting a division within the ACM to deal with precisely these issues. And so I'm not sure what exactly the value of sending your friends to Barbara at this point is, but hopefully in the near future there will be a resource available through the ACM as well.
Excellent. Great news. Other questions? Up there.
I work for the Financial Times, and I just wanted to give a practical example of why Marc Rotenberg's approach works, and it has to do with national ID cards. Since September 11th, I've been debating with myself whether I should write about them or not, and I pretty much decided, I just couldn't decide. It was a fine line. I thought they were never going to happen, so maybe I should just ignore them. And I knew that there was information on Marc's site about this. But, of course, knowing that there was information on Marc's site was not quite the same as going there and actually getting the information. Then Marc sent me an email, or somebody in his organization did, saying that they were having an information briefing on national ID cards. So I physically went to the information briefing, and in the end I did write an article about it, which, it just highlights how you get these things into the press, and I'm not, Robin's organization is great as well. There's lots of stuff there, and whenever I want anything, I know who I can call and ask. But anyway, that's just an example of how sometimes having a physical thing will get stuff into the press that wouldn't otherwise be there. The other thing is, don't send the letter in an envelope, Marc. Now, it's called letters.editor, at blah.com usually.
I think we could probably have a much longer discussion, which would be warranted, about developing greater press, activist communication, and education. But that's a very good comment.
Although, really the one tool that we've had, and the success that I think the public interest media movement has had, it is the ability to frame these issues in the press And as you get further consolidation and of ownership, with all these vested interests being directly involved in the issues about telecommunications and media, that does become a problem. But if you look at really where a lot of us have been able to have an impact on all these issues, it's been with the media. They've really been our only ally, because a lot of the other allies have simply been neutralized through corporate donations, the universities taking money from corporations. There have been really very few people where these issues have broadly resonated, except within the press.
Yeah, but they don't get the intellectual property stuff quite yet. And
No,
part of the problem with that is that you've got so many different parts of the newspaper that have an interest. The science people, the education people, the media, the technology. There's a lot of education to be done around information commons issues.
Jonathan had a quick.
Very quickly on spreading public message, and this goes to sort of the Cohen theory on what would conservatives do. That's a good. You know, one of the things that they did very effectively is that when a publication comes out, there's this system that distributes a fax where they have their marching orders and they repeat ad nauseum. You can almost see it when you flip the channels. One message, and maybe public knowledge can develop that, or there has to be some way that when there's a debate about the database legislation, that we all figure out what is the message that we can stick to, and we repeat it. You know, every time you repeat the word, you know, time after time, it sort of begins to drill into the public consciousness. We need that kind of system.
Mark, quickly, and then another question.
I just want to say quickly, before we get too carried away on the media point, I think it's extremely important to keep in mind, and I learned this a long time ago, that good substance is good politics. You can get attention with a soundbite, but you will not sustain a discussion. You will not earn respect. You will not have sort of the lasting impact that you need to have unless there's a footnote behind the soundbite. And what we try to do when we organize events, as we've done several times at the Press Club, is to find absolutely the best person in whatever the field is and get that person before the media to make the argument. And if we can find the best person in the field on the other side, we're happy to bring that person in as well, because we really want a genuine public debate. We want people to think about the issues and to form conclusions themselves. We may have views about what the right outcome is, but ultimately I think this debate succeeds best when people are empowered to make meaningful decisions about those factors that affect their lives.
And I think we can't forget that this is a real long-term fight. Like, a lot of these battles are won incrementally. You know, the first conversation wakes someone's brain up a little bit, the next one adds to it, and before you know it, they actually are making their own paragraphs.
Way back there.
I want to build on this for a moment. Both Gigi and Jeff have lamented the failures of the 1980s. I, unfortunately, have been doing this since the Carter administration. And I remember what the Reagan administration wanted to do in media policy. And the fact that we are able to have this debate today in terms of a series of rulemakings at the Federal Communications Commission means we haven't lost yet. If the Reagan administration had been able to do what they wanted to do, they would have gotten rid of all the restraints on media ownership in 1984, and then the 1984 analogy would have been right on time. It wouldn't have been 2 decades later. The simple fact of the matter is that they were restrained from doing so by political action, focused on the Congress. The Congress would always step up and say, you can't spend money to change that rule. And so when you send that letter to the editor, make sure you send it to your senator and your representative as well. They still ultimately will control this policy. Second point, and since I've been doing this since the Carter administration, Marc Rotenberg makes a point about getting the best people to say this stuff, and this goes back to the environmental analogy. The single most important document in my career in Washington, lo these many years, was a report from the Harvard Energy Project. There may be some other people who remember this book. That book said that conservation made sense, that energy efficiency made sense. That changed the entire terms of the debate, because the environmentalists had been saying that for years. But when Harvard Business School said it, no one could ignore it. I have heard people in this room tell me about industry guys who understand the importance of the public domain. We have to get one of those business schools to stand up. Not only Yochai can say it, but he's from NYU Law School. We need someone from Harvard Business School or Wharton Business School, or maybe even the business school here, to have a good, solid effort to demonstrate the importance, the value from the business side of this concept. That changes the terms of the debate.
Thank you. Let's get some other questions in here. Yes, sir.
One of the points I just pick up on this theme, which is that we're focusing on the national level. At least in North Carolina, city by city, we make decisions on, is cable regulated? How do you get access to it? Is there public access? And if we come back to President Moglen's point, if you want to do this, to go to Che's idea of the FOCO, you need to do this agitationally all across the country. Because very often you can stop something at the local level. When you stop something in Raleigh, North Carolina, or Durham, North Carolina, it gets the attention of legislators, and also you carve out space. Some communities have built their own broadband systems that are controlled by the community. Kind of ironic now to watch the broadband companies complain about unfair competition from the public. And in a sense, that's what they're doing. If you read their briefs, they're saying it is unfair for the public to compete against us. But what I'm saying is we need those resources down at the local level when you get the person to show up.
Quickly, Jeff.
That's really the purpose. One of the things we're doing. So on the website soon, right, will be the models that various cities have had to create a commons. For example, what Vermont did. So you'll have all those models there, the principles that all the people have written all around the world for creating these democratic infrastructures, and all those ideas will be available for people to take this campaign elsewhere.
One of the useful things to do would be for people to be able to come to the point about the business, if you can take the broader national kind of high-level discussion and have access to people who can help you apply it to the local situation, so that you can speak to your city council, you can speak to the state government in terms that make sense. In other words, I think even more than reaching out to the media, there has to be between the local community activists and the national activists some better connectivity where we can take our problems and say, this is what we're confronting. How can you help us marshal evidence to deal with this locally? Because we're facing the lobbyists from AOL, Time Warner, all these guys who come down. As was said, just like in the EU, they're sitting there at the local city council every single day, every time they meet. You got a job. You got to go do it. So
right there.
That would just be another suggestion.
I'm just going to attempt to philosophize a little bit here. Risk reputation I haven't even built up yet, so excuse me. I just want to talk a little bit about metaphors. I think that good metaphors can lead to building good constituency groups. And I was reading Professor Boyle's paper about the commons and about the enclosure movement. And I think that the idea of environment and moving that over into public domain is very good in a public sense because it generates activists, people who of different concerns about the internet can get together and have something in common. I think it's also very powerful because it's a good metaphor inside the courtroom as well as outside the courtroom. Inside the courtroom, I think it's a good one because of the tremendous advances the environmental movement has made in the concept of standing, of actually getting into court. It's great if you have wonderful ideas to argue, but if the court won't let you in to argue them, then forget it. So that's constitutional as well. Where I want to get philosophical is maybe suggesting that we could also have another complementary metaphor, and that is looking at what's going on, looking at this era in time as a renaissance, as the second renaissance, or a secular enlightenment, and kind of go back to what was happening around the time of the Protestant Reformation and the invention of the printing press. That this may be the right kind of analogy here. That transformed everything. I mean, at the time there was a universal church. There was a great intellectual property debate, except that only one side was able to talk, and they were talking in Latin. And that was, the Bible. That was the equivalent of encryption at the time. A great licensing scheme. If you wanted salvation, you had to pay indulgences. I think the real hero of the Protestant Reformation, I'm Catholic by the way, was not so much Martin Luther, but the printing press. And being able to produce Bibles on a mass scale was what really fueled that Reformation and got diversity of ideas out. And so I think that maybe, and this is my final point about, that this can get back to the Constitution, because in looking at the copyright clause, especially the first part of it, it talks about progress to promote science and the useful arts. I mean, that's exactly what this Renaissance could be about, and the more that we laden that front part of that clause and enrich its meaning and say this is what progress is all about, the more we can leverage the second part of the copyright clause, which says about exclusive rights.
Thank you. Well, we have time for 2 more questions. Evan.
Yeah, I did want to say something about another kind of local organizing that came out of this morning's conversation about science, and I'm sorry that so many of our professorial colleagues went to the other workshop. The university itself is a very important domain of activism at the moment for all the reasons that were brought out in Artie Rye's paper this morning. Most universities have a faculty senate, some have a university senate. There is some actual legislative power which can be used to assert both against technology managers and against university officials the public interest view of the university's activity, the disappearance of which people were lamenting. Artie's quite right to point to to Columbia University's patent revenue, for example, as a very important generator of its positions. But every employee of Columbia University, from somebody who sweeps the floor to a member of the professoriate with substantial university research grants, has a right to release any software she writes under GPL, regardless of the university's opinion about it. That was a little deal that I extracted by timely blackmail. At a time when the university wanted to make other changes in copyrights policy. The result was a deal between the dean of my law school and the president of the university in which a large amount of money changed hands to exclude me indefinitely from the university senate, which is now in force for reasons you cannot possibly imagine, I'm sure.
That's a good
but
deal.
that's
Sounds like a win-win to me.
Exactly. That was pretty much how I viewed it too. The point is not to forget that universities are actual political communities, and that organizing within them does have significant political effects on exactly the kinds of intellectual property policy that were being discussed this morning.
1 more question. Haven't you spoken enough?
I want to say thank you to the panel.
Oh.
But maybe you're going to.
One more channel. One more. Up there, Robert.
David, I'm Bob Young with Red Hat, and with somewhat different perspective on this because I used to be hanging out with the students and the other academics in this group, and recently with the success of Red Hat, I now hobnob with people who sit on boards of museums and own hockey teams, and just to reinforce a point Larry was making at the outset, and I can't tell you how important it is. The use of language is critically important. The moment you accuse your opponents of being corrupt, you lose the respect of people who would otherwise naturally be your allies. And the guys I hobnob with are not bad people. They may be selfish people. They may be blinded in some way. But they are not bad people, and we have to be very careful about figuring out how to engage them.
I want to respond because although I think, yes, you have to be very careful about the language, there have to be people who, in fact, can clearly identify how the political system has been corrupted, where the special interest money goes to, how they change legislation, why we are in this situation you're in. Go back, follow the dollars, follow the legislation, follow how the money has neutralized you. Isn't that corruption? I think it is. And
Wait. Draw a distinction between those individuals and the institutions that they are part of.
Well, if they participate in these kinds of activities, I think it's fair to call
Jonathan and Gigi.
The word corrupt. What I was trying to say was there's some social cachet that one gets from sitting on a board and doing so, and I think they should be required to abide by certain principles that we demand of them in order to get that.
By the way, their primary contribution along those lines is they are in fact supporting. That's how you get onto a museum board, is by giving them lots of money. So in that sense, they are contributing.
Yeah, but the museums, the whole cultural institutions have been corrupted.
Gigi.
I actually differ a little bit from my colleague in this regard, but to me there's 2 language issues, okay? One is about developing our own language to describe what we're talking about here. And you talk about metaphors, and environmentalism is great, but we're not the environmental movement, okay? We need to have some overarching language that ties together the scientists and the librarians and the artists. We don't have that yet. And I don't think, last week we talked about the information commons maybe being that organizing principle. But I think people think of the Commons as, Central Park or, a place where they get an ice cream cone, and it already has baggage, so to speak. So I think we need to think about a different kind of vocabulary, a different organizing principle. Please, I think of these things in my sleep. I'm not very creative, so I need your help. The second thing is around language is how we can co-opt the language of people we don't necessarily think are our friends. And I have to agree with Larry 100% is this is not a left-right issue. And we have to, if we start talking about, we talk about what would conservatives do, but if we start talking about I'm a good liberal, they're bad conservatives, we're screwed. It's just not, it doesn't work. Let me just finish, okay?
Sorry.
Okay? I think we have to co-opt the language of markets, okay? And co-opt language we may not necessarily like and use it to our advantage, okay? Because, like it or not, that's what a lot of policymakers and others think about. We can talk about working outside markets and gift economies and all that kind of stuff. But I also think we have to work within the structure that we've been given, which the conservatives have built for the last, 20, 30 years. Okay, here I go, sounding like a good liberal, and use that language to our advantage.
Marc, and then Jamie.
Okay. Can I just?
5 seconds.
All right, we'll be a little bit more, but on this point, I think it's okay. On this point of language, I just wanted to say, post-September 11th, we had one of our biggest organizing challenges that you could conceive of to respond to the legislative proposals that were moving through Congress. And we needed to put together 200 organizations across the political spectrum. We needed to bring on board 300 law professors. We needed a simple concept that would unify people at a time of enormous fear and a time of national crisis. And we wrote a 10-point statement and sat around and thought about what is it that we're trying to do. And we said, this is a statement in defense of freedom. And we grabbed the website, the domain, in defense of freedom. And we created a coalition called In Defense of Freedom. And for the last 2 months, 200 organizations across the country have been battling all of these proposals in defense of freedom. My point on language, and I disagree a little bit with Gigi here, is we should not be too clever, we should not be too rhetorical. In some respects, I think we need to be Lessegian. We need to be purposeful, clear, and powerful. That is how language conveys a message, and that's how you build public support.
Jamie? Thank you, panel.